So, Marina, what triggered your nutrition interest?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm really excited to have this kind of discussion with you because we have the same interests. And I thought it's nice to kind of share my experience, especially the fact that I kind of moved around. I'm an immigrant. I was born and raised in Romania, but I had the chance to travel to Spain and live there for a while, and then moved to Canada, where I'm currently living. So I guess my interest triggered where my interest came. It's actually I would go back to Spain when I realized after some years there where food is amazing and you kind of want to try this and bread and everything, that my diet wasn't quite the best, and it wasn't something that I was happy with. Also, I had at a personal level not such a bad experience and not such a great experience. So then I realized I wasn't taking care of my image, like also not only nutrition wise, but like how I was getting dressed. I was kind of getting comfortable into that situation, and also when I broke out with my ex-boyfriend, it's kind of what triggered me, my image, right? My image in total. So this is where my interest came also with nutrition. I start focusing my energy rather than the breakup and other personal stuff, more into sports, more into nutrition. Again, just because I wasn't very happy with my image at the time. So I started playing some tennis. I started taking the bike a lot, and I kind of felt with a lot of energy and way better after doing some exercise. And then this kind of followed, and I said to myself, okay, you can't just go for sports and have energy without a good diet, right? So let's look into a little bit more. So I kind of started investigating on my own and see what works for me, what does not, because of course we all know that there's so many diets out there, and we don't know exactly which is the best place to start with, or if that would work for you or not. So I guess for me was just trying to experience, see if something would follow into my guidelines, it would help me to feel a bit better, to feel with more energy so that I have more energy to keep going with my sports and everything. And then I was trying to see exactly what group of aliments affect my body and whatnot. So I guess back in Spain, there was kind of a trying to figure out and see what best works for me. But I wasn't so much. I didn't put so much interest as I would put when I came back to Canada. And the reason for that is that when I moved from Europe to Canada, I started feeling after a while really bloated. My stomach wasn't how it's supposed to be. I think I lost your image for a while, but
Yeah,
you keep talking.
I turned mine off because you're the image,
I
and I
see.
have a separate way
I
of
see.
recording mine. I thought it might
I see.
improve
I
our
see.
bandwidth.
Yeah.
But let me ask
Yeah.
on your question of eating and exercise. Every day you eat something different, but every day you would exercise. So did you have a sense that you had more energy when you ate some things versus other things?
Yeah, I felt way better and lighter. For example, when I'm not a big fan of veggies in general. So I was kind of trying to incorporate that in my diet through soups or through, I was boiling vegetables and just eating them like this with a little bit of olive oil. Being in Spain, olive oil is a big thing. They use olive oil in everything. So that's how I started to use it and incorporate more in my diet. So then I felt when I was eating that, the veggies, I felt, and more salads, I felt lighter, and my stomach felt better, my digestion improved. Especially with me was when I was eating salad and broccoli, which is interesting because you would say, oh, broccoli for other people does not work because, they're famous for producing some discomfort on our digestive system, but for me works perfectly. So I felt lighter, and feeling lighter, I felt with more energy to exercise. And the reason I say that is because when I moved here to Canada, even sometimes I eat veggies and salad, I feel way heavier than, like, my stomach feels really bloated and heavier, even with the vegetables that I have here. And sometimes this kind of makes me not want to exercise. It's like, oh my God, since I'm having the stone in my stomach, right? It's just kind of like I'm carrying that when I'm biking. So,
Yikes.
yeah, so it's not very fun. So when I moved here to Canada, I kind of tried to see what's happening and what triggered that bloating with nearly everything, like not only with vegetables or fruits, but even with protein or some other stuff that I've never had or have, right? If I'm going back to Europe, these issues, right? So then this is where actually my interest really got in deep into and see, okay, what's going on, what's happening. I saw a lot of doctors. I went to naturopath, but they literally kind of didn't help because, to be honest, they can't experience what one experience in their body because we're all so different, right? So then it got my frustration here. It's like, okay, if nobody can help me, I have to help myself.
Right.
So I started investigating, I started treating, and I started actually doing kind of elimination diet. See what's triggering, and I'm hopefully I'm on the right path. But also it depends, because what I noticed for me is that even if I eat one day the same thing, I don't feel the same every single day. And I think it's because also some other factors such as stress might come into place, metabolism, hours of sleep, which it's really important as well.
Tell me, let me ask quickly, what's your day in terms of exercise? I remember you were running. Do you go out every day and run in the morning and the evening?
Yeah. To be honest, I always try to put my exercise in the morning just because then I get lazy. It depends. I had some problem with my knee lately, so I'm actually combining. In general, my exercise starts around, I wake around 5:30, and at 6, I'm actually start my exercise, whether it's running 3 days a week, or whether it's training with my personal trainer back in England, which is my training. It's sometimes a HIIT interval or strengthening or body weight exercises, and then weekends, bikes, hikes, depending on the weather. I tend to also bike to my job when the weather permits, because here in Vancouver, we all know that it's rain Vancouver.
Right.
So, and also combining with yoga, Pilates. Every day I try to.
So I remember you saying some years ago, like a 5K is nothing. So, I mean, when you run, how far do you run? How long do you run?
Yeah, I used to run. I used to participate in half marathons. Not anymore. I think the age is coming into place. I had lately I'm having some knee issues. So probably that's one of the reasons I kind of tend to stick with 6-7 Ks. It depends on the energy.
Yeah.
And also some back issues. That's why I kind of try to combine lately with Pilates or with yoga, so that pressure on the knee doesn't come so often.
Okay.
It's true that it's nothing for me, but it's still a good exercise.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So we have another question here. So what's the best healthy habit for you?
I think, actually, exercising in the morning, that's one of the things, because I think there's some studies that show that if you start your exercise in the morning, your metabolism works way better, and you can actually feel better. It clears the mind, and especially if you do exercise outside. That's why I try to combine my running in the morning outside with my personal training here, of course, with my weights in my house, because I feel that for me, when I go and exercise outside, I feel way better because of the fresh air.
Yeah.
My blood, I have my circulation way better. I feel with more energy. My mind is clear. So this really helps me a lot.
Yeah.
So that's one. And the second one, I tend to not eat anything after, like, my last dinner. It's around 7 at the latest. But in general, I tend to finish my dinner around 5, 6, so that I can have 4 hours up until I go to bed, so that I can actually digest.
Yeah.
And the third one, which they say is the charm, I tend not to eat carbs during night. I always take my carbs in the morning for energy, a bit of quinoa or a bit of bread or whatever that might be. But if I take some carbs, it's always in the morning for me.
Okay. Yeah, I've been reading books and listening to podcasts about the importance of time restricted eating, that your body, you need 5 or 6 or 8 hours to digest food and then rest your organs and all that stuff. So having a long window between when you finish in dinner and start in the morning. We've discussed some before, the the ongoing battles over low carb versus low fat versus this versus that. So one question, what's your opinion and experience with this, like, low carb diet? Some people go keto, which is a little more extreme, or carnivore, but low carb is sort of the first step.
Yeah, I guess as you mentioned, there's so many studies out there, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not pretend to be, and I don't want to give any nutrition advice. The only thing I'd like to talk, it's about my experience, as you mentioned, right, and what worked for me. And I guess for a woman, it's a little bit harder, a low carb diet, because yes, it's true that you get excited because you suddenly lose a lot of weight. But that's also because the fact that you don't have those, and that's something that what I'm saying right now is because of some discussion I had with a dietitian actually and doctors, is that taking out the carbs, in general, carbs do retain more water and salt, so then you feel more puffy, a little bit heavier. But once you get rid of those ones, and when I say carbs, I talk about carbs like rice, quinoa, bread. I'm not talking, because we still eat carbs. We have carbs in fruits, we have carbs in vegetables, but they're another type of carbs, right? So I just want to stress that when I'm talking about carbs, that's what I refer. Suddenly you lose a lot of weight just because you don't retain so much water, but also it's the body water, right, and the salt. That's what I was advised by doctors. But for me, it's true that you can get excited and say, yes, I lost some weight, but then there's some health issues. I do suffer thyroid, so I have to be really, my situation is very delicate, and I have to be very careful of my hormones and the balance. So I always try to work with an endocrinologist on this side of a thing. But when I try the low carb diet, for me was not so much about losing weight. For me was just because of my metabolism, it's really slow, just to keep my hormones on balance.
So are you holding your microphone in your hand and rubbing it back and forth?
I'm just holding it a bit because I do have some issue with I do have some issue with the speaker sometimes. So I just want to make sure that
sounds okay, but I could hear a little bit. Yeah.
Now it's better. Okay, I had some issues, so that's right. I had some health issues after I did that, and I thought it's just a coincidence, but I tried several times, and it happened the same thing. It's something very personal. I don't want to talk what happened, but obviously it affects me as a woman, right? And it happened 3 or 4 times, exactly at the point where I took out my carbs. So I personally don't recommend for myself, because it did not work, and because of my thyroid problem. But again, each one of us is different.
People are different, and as I've mentioned before, the Nina Teicholz, when she talks about low carb, she says, well, this is just what Americans ate up until 1980. They had carbs in their diet, but just less. when the government pushed low fat, that boosted the carbs in the average diet. Of course, it also boosted processed food and sugar and so forth. So there's so many moving parts. It's hard to tell, which is which, and everyone's different. So
Exactly. And then it's also something that I notice for me. I always say, and maybe that would be something that I would always encourage people like me that are interested in this and they suffer from this. Try your diet. Work, of course, also with a nutritionist or with a dietitian or with a doctor. But also be mindful that if something does not work for you, you don't have to always say, oh, but that was a research. Yeah,
right,
okay, but we're all different, right?
right,
So might not work for you. And meanwhile, you always feel good. You're using a limit in everything. I always say, if you want to have a glass of wine, just have it, but have a limit, right? Rather than three
right,
glasses of wine or the whole bottle, just
right,
have one. But then also try to when you go on a diet, my advice here is also to check your health in terms of like blood tests and all those things to make sure that you don't miss any nutrients, any vitamins. So that would be my I think
right.
something that I would always advocate for.
Yeah, so this seems to be a helpful overview. We've gone through a number of questions, discussions of nutrition, and sort of your story. And the goal was to try and start this nutrition podcast, starting with sort of your questions and issues. And one of the things you mentioned in our conversations is that you've changed places. And so the food in the U.S., the milk, or not the U.S., the Canada and the West, the milk, the food, the stuff in the store is sort of different than what you had in Spain, maybe different than Romania. Some people have said the microbiome shifts as we move from place to place. So in a sense, for migrants, for people who, you're halfway across the world from where you started, and the food is different, and yeah, so you're dealing with some of those issues as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I always like to and for put this example, right? When I can't have milk here, I always go with oat milk. But when I go to Europe, people are laughing at me because I forget that I go to Europe and I'll say, oh, can I have a coffee with a bit of oat milk? And they look at me kind of like, because it's not so popular, right? Of course you find, but it's not so popular. And then one day I was in my mom's house and I'm like, I'm actually curious because I always tend to look at ingredients. So I took the bottle, the milk, and I switched around and I looked at the ingredients and I noticed that the sugar percentage is 3 grams. And then when I came here to Canada, I was like, I'm going to look how much it's here. And the same percentage of fat, and it was 15. So from
Yeah,
3 to 15 grams. So I'm like, that might be also an issue, right? And
right.
that's why I feel so bloated. I feel so heavy. I feel with so
Yeah,
much retention of water, let's say, which is one of the ongoing problem for me.
yeah,
So obviously there's some differences, and
yeah.
of course medical
Lactose,
may.
they label lactose as a sugar. Some people are lactose intolerant, and there's different amounts. Northern European cows versus Southern this that. So yeah, I spent after you mentioned this, I spent a bunch of time trying to research the amount of sugar in European milk, and I couldn't find heads or tails of it, just because the labeling was different, the rules are different, and so forth. But I have talking to a number of people who've come from different countries in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe. I ask them what they miss about where they came from, and they say the dairy products, the milk, the ice cream, the cream, because each valley has got different grass, different cows, and different traditions. Yeah, so, but it's interesting that in our digestive system, doesn't respond the same way to very different foods.
Exactly, and I would add here on the list bread. And people who might listen to this postcard, they will be like, "Oh my God, no, that's I have to lose weight or something." And I would, in my opinion, I would say, in the morning, if you ask a European dietitian, if you ask a European doctor, they would actually say, "Please do go with bread." And you know what's funny is that actually they always say white bread and not multigrain because it's way less processed.
Yeah,
And I was very happy to learn that. I didn't know that. I was like, oh no, it should be multigrain. And they're like, no, it's way more processed.
I was shocked to find that stuff out. I've got this book, A Grain Brain, and I always thought that white bread was created, for soldiers in World War II. But then I find out that ancient Rome was having a competition with like other countries, like who's got the whitest bread. So it's a bit of a mystery about grain and nutrition, and there's huge battles on all this stuff. But it's an exploration, and I maybe to sum up, it's been good talking to you about these things. There's a shelf full of books and people with different views, and N equals one is the key thing. You're the example of one. It's just you. You have your own history, microbiome, genetics, and so that's a discovery process. What food, what exercise, what time to eat, what things work for you, and it's going to be different for me and anybody else.
Exactly, and I would be happy to hear some other story or your story
Yeah,
whenever you might want to share that.
next time, next time. Okay,
Next time.
thank you very much, Marina. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Greg.
Okay, bye bye, bye bye.
Bye.